Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Web fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. We've got a full suite of pills tonight. We'll also be touching upon the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as well as updating you guys in regards to some new news around the Freedom Convoy and kind of comparing what's going on right now with Tamara Lich to some other, Canadian criminals and seeing whether this really makes a lot of sense. But before we even jump into tonight's show, just want to let you guys know we got our first, or this channel got our first community guideline strike for yesterday's video. So if you're curious to see, what was worthy of me getting a strike, go back and watch that video. But essentially, just an FYI, if we disappear here, so if I get another strike, we'll essentially be on a 1-week hiatus on YouTube. So a reminder, you guys can always watch this on BitChute or on Rumble as well. Right now, I only do the replays up there, but I guess before this channel gets nuked by YouTube, I think it would be nice. It would just be a little bit of a mental victory for me to get to 1,000 subscribers. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed on YouTube, it'd be a lot cooler if you did, I guess is what I'm saying. So again, I would just, before they take the channel away from me, I'd like to know that I at least got to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. But again, if you guys want to check us out on Rumble or BitChute, link in the video description down below. But let's jump into tonight's stories, and we're going to be starting off with the Ukraine and Russia situation. So let's pull up the screen share. Oh, how did that do the wrong screen? Let's try this again. Screen share. Interesting. All right. Well, that's never happened before. How did that get messed up? All right. Well, anyways, we're going to roll with it. I'll switch my browsers. And, man, I'm going to have to reset some things. Okay. Well, anyways, let's keep rolling here. From National Post, Ukraine updates day 8, humanitarian corridors granted by two sides after a second round of negotiations. It was the first time that the two sides had agreed to any form of progress on any issue since Russia invaded Ukraine a week ago. So if you guys want to check out some of the highlights and headlines in regards to what's going on in Ukraine, link in the video description down below, as always, to all the different stories we're going to cover. But secondly, what I want to cover here from the Ron Paul Institute, Russia-Ukraine war, a different invasion, the West same madman script. And this really is worth reading from cover to cover, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of the first paragraphs here. How convenient for Western leaders that every time another country defies the West's projection of power, the Western media can agree on one thing, that the foreign government in question is led by a madman, a psychopath, or a megalomaniac. At a drop of a hat, Western leaders are absolved of guilt or even responsibility for the terrible events that unfold. The West remains virtuous simply by a victim of the world's madmen. Nothing the West did was a provocation. Nothing they could have done would have averted the disaster. The U.S. may be the most powerful state on the planet by far, but its hands are apparently always tied by a deranged, implacable foe like Russia's Vladimir Putin. And it is important that we actually look at this situation not like a Disney movie where there's clearly a good guy and a bad guy, but actually as a complex geopolitical situation, as we've been talking about multiple times now on this show. Next, I want to highlight from Timcast, and this is really concerning, in my opinion, the demonization, not just of Putin, not just of Russia, but of every Russian citizen. And it really does seem like the West, based upon politicians and the mainstream media's parroting and positioning on the subject matter, really do want to demonize every single Russian. And this never leads to a good place. But from Timcast, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, claims there are no innocent Russians. There are no more innocent, neutral Russians anymore. Everyone has to make a choice, support or oppose this war. The only way to end this war is with hundreds of thousands, not thousands, protest against the senseless war. Putin can't arrest you all, McFaul tweeted on Wednesday morning. And again, if you guys kind of want to follow the tweet thread, check out the Timcast article here. But I just wanted to highlight this from Martyr Made as well. So these soy-soaked psychotics must be physically removed from positions of power. And I just want to highlight two of the tweets that Darrow's referring to here. So please explain to me why these Russian tax-paying supporters of Putin are free of responsibility for this horrific war, just because they are brainwashed? Now, if we apply this to any other world situation, does the same sort of logic hold here, Michael? Because right now, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Saudi-Yemen war, it's up to like 200,000 casualties in Yemen, if I'm not mistaken. What about, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and us going into Iraq and starting a war there on false pretenses, right? Again, this isn't black and white. There's not a Disney hero and a Disney villain in the situation in Russia. Again, that's not to, absolve Putin of blame or responsibility for what's going on, but to literally say that every Russian citizen is responsible, right? Let's think about all the bad things all of our governments have done at this point in time, right? And we don't even need to go back decades. We can literally think in the last 5 years. What have our countries done that we're not proud of, right? Here in Canada, what about just essentially abandoning our allies in Afghanistan and having no proper plan to actually evacuate the people that helped us for the last 20 years as we fought a war over there? What about right now in China with the, million plus, I've heard upwards of over 2 million people in concentration camps that are Uyghur Muslims? Is every country that sent their sports teams over to China to participate in the Olympics, are they guilty as well? Right? This posturing is just honestly childish. And I guess it honestly showcases the level of respect and the level of intellectual integrity they expect from their average citizen, that you guys will just be like, yeah, Russia bad. And this other tweet, again, there are no more innocent, neutral Russians anymore. Everyone has to make a choice: support or oppose this war. The only way to end this war is if hundreds of thousands, not thousands, protest against this senseless war. Putin can't arrest you all. Again, like, things can escalate there, right? Do you remember? I'm forgetting the state university, but back during the Vietnam War, right? You literally had the National Guard open up on protesters. People can and could quite likely lose their lives in Russia if they speak out. So to literally demonize every single citizen over what's currently going on in Ukraine just seems beyond naive or overly simplistic, in my opinion. Next, I want to highlight this from Candace Malcolm. So now we're switching gears and going to start talking about the Trucker Freedom Convoy here in Canada. So I hear from a source in the Loop that Chrystia Freeland's office lost their shit that this is even being reported. We can see that they're doing major damage control, pushing friendly media to cover for her. So we covered this yesterday about her standing with Ukrainian protesters and essentially holding the red and black banner, which is often associated with far-right individuals and neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And the reason I say that this kind of segues into the Trucker Freedom Convoy is, remember how we, not me, but like we as in the more royal we, the Canadian politicians, as well as mainstream corporate press legacy media here in Canada, immediately demonized any conservative or any politician for that matter, but it was really only conservatives here that were willing to actually stand with the truckers because there was one Nazi flag there. Why doesn't that logic apply to this situation as well? And yet we can see that Chrystia Freeland's press secretary is going full force on damage control here. So National Post spent more time explaining the situation and kind of carrying her water on this situation versus even giving the benefit of the doubt to the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters in Canada. Did Chrystia Freeland's pose with the extremist symbols, or is it Russian disinformation? A classic KGB disinformation smear is accusing Ukrainians and Ukrainian Canadians of being far-right extremists or fascists or Nazis, Freeland's press secretary said. So one, understand she put out this photo on Twitter, got backlash, and then immediately removed it. If there was nothing to be ashamed of here, if there was no neo-Nazi connection, why would you remove the photo, right? If you were actually innocent here and we're taking this out of context, why the concern over it? And then secondly, understand that this is a common thing we've seen from Chrystia Freeland back in 2016, 2017, when Russia was saying that her grandfather worked for the Nazis and was a collaborator. She again came out and said that's classic KGB misinformation. But literally, her grandfather did collaborate with the Nazis and did run a media outlet for them. Again, we covered this with multiple different stories referencing the Globe and Mail, and then I think the other one was the National Post or the Province. You guys can go back and watch a couple episodes ago, but this is just so dismissive, right? Again, I'm not saying that she should be burned at the stake for being in a photo op with a distasteful symbol, right? Because I also don't think the conservatives that had someone walking in the background with a swastika on a flag that they should be demonized. No, it literally is like, where's your stance, right? And the fact that the liberals don't see any issue with this, but they immediately would demonize the truckers, tells you everything about the level of integrity in our politics and our mainstream media right now. And we should all be really pissed off about this. Again, not because she posed with this photo, but because there's not the same consequences for her as were done for conservative members of parliament here in Canada. Again, it's just, if the stakes weren't so high, as in stakes involving like potentially us going to war with Russia, and stakes like us losing our freedoms here in Canada and finding ourselves almost in a dictatorship with Trudeau, I wouldn't even give a shit about these things. But again, there are consequences to this, right? An entire population here in Canada has been gaslit to believe that the truckers are misogynist, that they're Nazis, that they're racist, and now they're also rapists, right? According to Mendocino. And it's beyond infuriating, in my opinion. And more of us need to speak out and stand up against this silliness. And speaking of silliness, this is from the Washington Post, but again about the Ukraine. International Cat Federation bans Russian cats from competitions. What fucking clown world do we live in, right? Like, I was reading another article today about, I think FIFA is removing from their video games the Russian team. Like, are we just going to erase them from history? Or is this some Stalinist shit that we want to implement here in the West? It's beyond bizarre. Again, I could understand if these cats were on the front lines genociding Ukrainians, but I don't believe that they are. At least I haven't seen any firm evidence that these cats are evil. Now from CTV News, federal government warns Canadians against fighting for Russia and Ukraine. So, not that I suspect a lot of Canadians were planning to go over and fight on behalf of Russia in this conflict, but the Deputy Prime Minister wants to make sure you're aware that it's probably illegal and they will go after you. I'm not sure where it ranks in regards to fighting for Russia compared to, protesting peacefully in Ottawa, but I imagine they might be considered similarly evil as far as our liberal politicians are concerned. Next, now switching full gear into the Freedom Trucker Convoy. It's important to spend a little bit of time because sometimes these memes can be oversimplistic or sometimes even misleading. This one, not. This is Robin Walker. Robin is a convicted murderer. While out on parole, he was convicted of sexual assault. Now he is out on parole yet again. This is Tamara Litch. Tamara did not murder or sexually assault anyone. Her only crime was protesting Trudeau. And again, the government says that she was, causing mischief and inciting mischief, right? Yet she's being denied bail. And when she goes into court, she's literally wearing leg shackles. And don't just take my word for it, but here's a Toronto Sun article essentially warning people about this potential felon who's out on parole because they believe he's a high risk at reoffending. So again, I'll let you guys read through it, but essentially back in 1983, he received a life sentence, an indeterminate life sentence, which I'll need to go research because I'm not even sure what that exactly means. But he was allowed out on parole, and while he was out on parole, he was convicted of sexual assault and assault, and was sentenced to 3 years in custody, and it's been in prison since that time. So again, this guy, we should give him a second chance. Tamara Litch, we can't trust her. It's just wild. And here's another one. I haven't had a chance to dive as deep into this one to fact check it, but it passed the initial sniff test. So Steve Bragg strangled a woman with a bootstrap in St. John's in 2017, bail granted. Umar Zamir ran over and killed a cop intentionally in Toronto in 2021, bail granted. Asmar Shai, convicted in 2017 of murdering an 18-year-old man in Calgary, bail granted. Tamara Litch, organizer of Ottawa Convoy protests in 2022, bail denied. Next from the National Post, and again, look at how some of our mainstream media outlets are choosing to frame what's going on with the GoFundMe investigation. More than $1 million donated to GoFundMe for Freedom Convoy came from outside Canada. But wait, wasn't there like $10 million raised? So doesn't that mean like almost 90% of the money raised was actually from Canadians? But wait, I thought mainstream media and our politicians were telling us this was all Americans and Russian agitators, and that, there was no sincere Canadians involved in this situation. GoFundMe's president and general counsel speak before the House of Commons Public Safety and National Security Committee. So I encourage you guys to go read this thoroughly and just see how much they're manipulating it. But you can see in National Post here, literally in the second paragraph, speaking to members of the Federal Public Safety and National Security Committee Thursday, GoFundMe president Juan Benitez said that 88% of the more than $10 million raised originated from Canada, and 86% of donors were based in Canada. Really feels like that's the opposite of what politicians were telling us while this was going down. But again, don't worry, there won't be any consequences for those politicians. At least CTV News was a little bit more honest in their headlines here. GoFundMe head testifies over Freedom Convoy fundraising, says most donors were Canadian. Yeah. And I would even go so far as to say not just most, but the vast majority, if we're talking about 88 and 86%. But again, didn't our politicians literally tell us something completely different less than a month ago about this? Yeah. Next, I want to highlight this. This was a Viva Frey tweet, but essentially involves Russell Brand, and I think Russell really nails it on the head here. So I'm just going to do the screen share, and let's listen.
In the words of Barry McKillop, Deputy Director of Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre, FinTrack, who spoke before Canada's House of Commons Finance Committee on Thursday, the money the organisers managed to raise was not only not cash that funded terrorism or was in any way money laundering, it was simply a way for people living in what they thought was a democratic country, believing was a safe way of expressing their position on an issue. People living in what they thought was a democratic country, believing was a safe way of expressing their position on an issue. The only mistake they made was believing they were in a democratic country. That is what they did wrong. They weren't terrorists. They weren't money launderers. They were ordinary Canadian people who made the mistake of thinking they were living in a democracy. I hope you won't make that mistake again. If you don't know, now you know.
Again, let that sink in. Literally, FinTrack is saying that essentially the only thing that these protesters were doing is believing that they lived in a democracy where they could protest the government. Kind of makes for an awkward moment for our politicians, doesn't it, when they say the quiet part out loud, as Viva Frey is highlighting here. Next, from the Toronto Star, House votes in favor of Emergencies Act Oversight Committee. In theory, this sounds like a good thing until you start reading a little bit of the details around it. So here's a direct quote from Perrin Beattie. There isn't even an agreement on the structure of the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, let alone what sort of a report would come out of it, said Perrin Beattie, who introduced the Emergencies Act in 1987 while serving as defense minister in Brian Mulroney's progressive conservative government. That's unfortunate. It disservices this country. The act states that the committee members will take an oath of secrecy and review in private any order or regulation issued in secret while the declaration of emergency was in effect. But the Privy Council office confirmed that no such orders or regulations were made, and it's expected some, if not most, of the committee's work will be done in public. So again, the reason I highlight this is, if I understand it correctly, what they're saying is there's no like secret information that politicians had in order to decide to enact the Emergencies Act. Literally, they had the same information essentially we did. And now we've got FinTrack stating that, oh, yeah, the only real mistake we see is that people thought they lived in a democracy. And then later on, the only other thing we've got coming out in regards to this is, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We'll pick up. So given the bickering over the committee, Senator Scott Tannis, leader of the Canadian Senators Group, CSG, proposed on Wednesday that the upper chamber also strike its own Senate-only committee to review the government's use of the Emergencies Act and deliver an interim report no later than June 15th. So it is good that, well, hopefully the Senate will actually do their own independent investigation. Hopefully between these two investigations, we'll get to the bottom of something. And I just remembered the train of thought I lost there. Also, remember, the same government that was telling us that it was foreign agitators driving this, that was probably Russian propaganda and Russian donators and shit like that, And yet we know from the GoFundMe testimony that 88% of donors were Canadian, 86% of funds were from Canadians. So again, why the fuck do these people expect us to trust them on the Ukraine-Russia situation when they literally just gaslit us in our own country over what was a truly peaceful protest? Now, switching gears and getting into our first blue pill story of the day. This is from Post Millennial. Analyst warns rising diesel prices admits could inflate cost of food by 30%. A petroleum industry analyst is warning what a spike in diesel prices brought on by geopolitical tensions could cause food prices in Canada to rise dramatically. So I'm hearing stories that people are seeing like $1.70. I went and got gas. I forget whether it was at the start of this week or last week, but essentially it was before we started imposing oil sanctions on Russia. And like, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere to begin with. So we're already usually at like $1.60 for gas. I can't imagine what we're going to see it hit, but we are seeing projections from different people saying it could climb as high as or over $2. This is from the Global News. Gas prices soared to record highs across Quebec and are expecting to climb higher. So again, just interesting, they're showing $1.80 here in Quebec right now for gas. So again, we are about to see just crazy inflation here in Canada. Now, the Bank of Canada did raise interest rates 0.25% yesterday. That may have a mild impact on what's going on, but I don't think it's actually going to stop the bleeding here. We need a lot more than triage to fix what's going on with our economy and inflation. Next, from the Globe and Mail, Jean Charest says he's not afraid of a tough battle for Conservative leadership. I almost considered putting this as a white pill story. And the reason I kind of view this as a white pill or a blue pill story is I actually kind of hope he runs. And I honestly wouldn't even mind if he ends up becoming the leader of the PC party here in Canada. Because, let's just get it over with and admit that the progressive Conservatives essentially are just liberal light at this point in time. And what better way than to have a former liberal premier run as the leader of the Conservative Federal Party here in Canada? And it just feels very fitting. And I hope it creates a massive division in the Conservative Party and actually causes a lot of those people that actually, they've got a moral and ethical compass that they actually live by. They actually believe that we need to get spending under control. They actually believe in individual freedoms and rights to actually finally leave the Conservative Party and join the PPCs. Again, I don't want to paint the PPCs as some perfect party because I don't think that perfect political parties exist. But for the love of God, compared to all the other options, they don't seem too bad in my opinion. Next, from the Globe and Mail, in a war being waged for all humanity, the West is paying a shamefully small price. Seems pretty bombastic. In a war being waged for all humanity, the West is paying a shamefully small price. So again, all the other battles, all the other wars going on right now, and presumably for the last couple of decades, really aren't nearly as important as the Ukraine crisis right now in this moment. And that's just asinine, in my opinion. This is a direct quote from our Deputy Prime Minister. There are moments in history when the great struggle between freedom and tyranny come down to one fight in one place, which is waged for all of humanity, Mrs. Freeland said. Indeed, she did not understate the gravity of the situation, which is perhaps why I'm likely not the only Canadian feeling somewhat sheepish about our response in the West to the reckless, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces. But again, what about all the other crazy shit going on in the world? Why does the Ukraine matter so much when we've talked about, and maybe you guys are getting annoyed at me bringing up the Uyghur Muslims in China or the Yemen proxy war, right? And the 200,000 that are dead there. Or even just the random drone strikes that Biden has done under his term where, we accidentally killed children and women. Again, it's such an oversimplistic view. And I can't help but feel like if it wasn't for you guys and a handful of other people I follow on social media, I would literally feel like I'm going fucking crazy right now. Because I almost can guarantee 5 or 10 years from now, it feels, at least based upon the current trajectory, we're going to look back on this and there's going to be all sorts of little things that are going to come out. It's going to come out that it turns out a lot of American politicians and a lot of lobbyists have major interest in Ukraine. Oh, it's going to turn out that Putin wasn't literally going to try and sweep across Europe like we feared the USSR was going to do back in the peak of the Cold War. And if they couldn't take down the American empire during the peak of the Cold War, when they literally did have Ukraine and they had a lot of the Warsaw Pact members on their side, and now most of those former Warsaw Pact members are against them, why do we believe Russia's a greater threat now? Yes, they are starting a hot war in Ukraine. Yes, war is bad. But to literally say that this is a battle being waged for all of humanity, very oversimplified. Now let's switch gears and get into our first red pill story of the day. This is from Blacklock's reporter. Cabinet shelves Vax proposal. So Cabinet is shelving a proposal to force interprovincial truckers to show proof of vaccination. It follows the 24-day Freedom Convoy blockade of Parliament by drivers opposed to a vaccine mandate at the Canada-US border. Vaccine mandates are something we continue to listen to stakeholders very keenly with, but things change. Labour Minister Seamus O'Regan yesterday told reporters. Public health changes, science changes, lots of things are changing. It's very much in flux. I think what he means by that is they found that their position's no longer tenable, and they will completely get destroyed if they continue to essentially be the authoritarians that they wish they could be, because they're looking to our neighbors in the South and like, God damn it, Biden's not even pulling the COVID narrative anymore. He's essentially given up on it. Yeah. So we'll just leave that there. And next from the National Post, first reading. Oh, look at that. Nobody cares about COVID anymore. Yeah, it's really interesting how the news cycle seems to dictate, the severity of COVID. And it just like, God damn it. We live in the clown world. Next from National Observer, and this is a story we covered earlier on, but Canada very unlikely to get money back on TMX investment, financial watchdog says. At what point in time do we actually ever hold these politicians accountable that they're like, oh, Canada might actually make money on this deal? Because that's literally what they're saying right now about their bailout of Air Canada. I can guarantee you 5 years from now, we're going to be seeing headlines saying, oh, Canada actually lost money on bailing out Air Canada. And it definitely appears to be the case for the TMX pipeline. So Canada's financial watchdog says the federal government is very unlikely to recoup its $4.5 billion investment in the Trans Mountain pipeline, now that the project's costs have soared by 70%. On February 18th, Trans Mountain Corporation announced the project cost of the pipeline expansion has risen from $12.6 million to $21.4 billion. The news release said that COVID-19 pandemic and last year's floods in BC, and Fraser Valley areas contributed to increased costs. Again, there's just always an excuse for why they go massively over budget. And I can't help but feel like, how accurate are your budgets in the first place if you literally never get it right? Now, getting into some black pill stories, and this one's a doozy in my opinion. From the Post-Millennial, environmental racism bill by Greens will be supported by Liberals. So the Green Party MP Elizabeth May and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau agreed to move forward with the revised bill C-230 to develop a federal strategy for environmental racism and move forward environmental justice after she reintroduced the bill that died on the order paper last year. So let's just listen to this little clip here. But I think Jordan Peterson did a great job of surmising things. What do you get when you multiply two virtue signals together? We're about to find out. Oh, I thought that was just going to autoplay for me.
Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last Parliament, Lenore Zann, former member for Cumberland Colchester, introduced a landmark bill, Bill C-230, to develop a federal strategy for environmental racism and to move towards environmental justice. The Environment Committee, after widespread support in this place, studied the bill, made amendments. I recently had the honor to reintroduce it as Bill C-266 in order to work towards getting this bill passed. I ask, Mr. Speaker, will parliamentarians in this House work together to ensure passage of this important support the bill once again?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for her question, and I want to also thank Lenore Zann, the former member for Cumberland Colchester, for her important work on this bill in the previous Parliament. We know that the impacts of climate change are felt more acutely by marginalized or minority groups, and this bill would ensure environmental racism is addressed. And
you know what's actually truly felt more by marginalized groups? Inflation. why don't you actually get inflation in check first before focusing on this virtue signaling bullshit? And this is honestly, just in my humble opinion, a way to create more justification for ESGs, right? Like environmental, social, good scores and all that bullshit. That again, it's going to create a social credit system. They'll first roll it out to corporations, but they'll eventually then bring it to bear on every single citizen. And if you guys are really in a panic about climate change, you're like, man, I don't want my house to be underwater, 2 months or 2 years or 2 decades from now. I really encourage you to go check out this book, False Alarm. It's the book I was talking about yesterday from Bjorn Lomborg. And again, fantastic book that really puts things into real perspective and starts off by discussing the history of climate science and how wrong we've always been. Literally, we've always got it wrong with every one of our models. What has changed? Blacklock's reporter, hard to track Fed spending. So federal budgeting leaves taxpayers with little ability to follow each and every dollar, budget officer Yves Gouraud said yesterday. Current practice sees cabinet propose billions in spending with little oversight, he said. There are mechanisms to prevent inappropriate expenditures, but there is no guarantee all these mechanisms are followed, Gouraud testified at the Senate National Finance Committee. Once the money is approved, it is much more difficult to follow each and every dollar. That's what I've been afraid of, replied Senator David Richards, who questioned budget practices. Cabinet on Monday tabled 2022 to 23 main estimates on federal spending that averages more than $420 billion a year. Essentially, what the government is telling you is trust us and trust the officials, and we will use that money efficiently and to the best purpose that we are saying we'll use it for, said Gouraud. That is the way the system is designed, he added. Again, we cover this almost on a daily, but certainly a weekly basis here. Government overspenditures, right? We were just talking about the Phoenix Pay system that was going to save taxpayers billions of dollars. That turns out actually cost us billions and billions of dollars beyond what they initially estimated. Like, why the fuck do we pay taxes at this point in time? It just seems like we'd be better off literally just lighting it on fire to make smoke signals to a pagan god. Wanted to highlight this tweet from Pierre Poilievre because, again, while I don't think that he's all bad, I don't think that he's the white knight that's going to save Canada either, because I just see so much virtue signaling and politicking on his behalf. So Melissa Lantsman tweeted out one more time, why is the ambassador still in Canada? And this is in regards to the Russian embassy. And Pierre Poilievre says, good point, Melissa, kick him out today. And Viva Fry brings up, did you also recommend kicking out China's ambassador to Canada? If you didn't, Pierre Poilievre, should we conclude that the Conservative Party of Canada supports genocide and human rights abuses in China? Or was this tweet a sarcastic jab at Melissa Lantsman? Seriously. Yeah, literally seriously. Because, again, what good is virtue signaling to your average Canadian right now that's going to experience inflation that a lot of us have literally never lived through before? We're on the cusp of it. Next from the Western Standard, digital IDs coming to Ontario this fall. Despite concerns over online security, 68% of Canadians said they would be willing to share more personal information online if it meant a more convenient experience. And this is the problem with people in general, is the willing to give up everything for convenience. Things shouldn't always be easy, right? There's this whole idea in personal finance and personal development and health and fitness of delayed gratification. And honestly, at this point in time, I don't believe outside a handful of individuals are capable of passing the marshmallow test, right? That simple test, the idea of like sitting down a toddler in front of a marshmallow and being like, hey, I'm going to leave the room for 2 minutes. If you don't eat the marshmallow, by the time I come back, I'll give you another marshmallow. I don't trust anyone to be able to pass that test at this point in time. And so because of that, I'm not okay giving up my rights and freedoms simply because the rest find it convenient. And again, we already saw that when the government has power over you, they will not hesitate to use it, right? Think about freezing bank accounts of peaceful protesters and declaring an Emergencies Act. Well, how much easier would it be for them if, say, your digital ID was tied to everything, right? It was tied to, say, your banking. It was tied to your driver's license. They could have literally just with a flip of a switch been like, who's in this geographic region? Okay, everyone now no longer has a driver's license, so they're not allowed to drive anymore. Or we're just going to freeze all their bank accounts. And if you believe the government won't abuse this power, for the love of God, grow up and start studying history. So again, if you guys want to understand the quagmire we're about to get in, because the Ontario government is moving forward with this by the end of this year, link in the video description down below. Next from the Toronto Sun, Melinda French Gates calls Jeffrey Epstein abhorrent and evil. And first of all, I just want to highlight how convenient it is that she waited until she essentially divorced Bill Gates and until after Epstein was dead before she speaks out about him, right? Once everyone has decided he's evil, that's when she comes out to actually talk about it as well. This is something that we were talking about briefly yesterday, right? If you see bad, if you see evil, you actually have a duty to speak out about it, right? I can't help but think that a lot of pedophiles, a lot of sex abusers, they don't exist in a vacuum. And they have friends and family, co-workers, and people that probably see signs. And yet they choose to look the other way because it's more convenient for them. Kind of like what we just talked about before. But quotes here from the Toronto Sun. Melinda French Gates told Gayle King on CBS Mornings on Thursday that her ex-husband's relationship with the late Epstein definitely played a role in their split. I did not like that he had meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. No, I made that clear to him, French Gates told King, according to the New York Post. But again, I'm pretty sure I watched that documentary on Netflix where they said that they were essentially partners together, right? And that if I remember correctly, Bill wouldn't just do something against Melinda's recommendation. So again, it's very convenient how a lot of these narratives come out. She added she met the convicted sex offender exactly one time because she wanted to see who this man was. I regretted it the second I walked in the door, French Gates, 57, told King. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. My heart breaks for these women. But what did you actually do if you knew the moment you met him that he was abhorrent and evil? What did you do, Melinda? You did what every other elite did, which is look the other way. And that's if we're giving you the benefit of the doubt, to be honest, because a lot of elites very clearly participated. Next from Blacklock's reporter, lobbied and bar CRTC silent. And again, this is this is just a sign of the games politicians and administrators are willing to play because they don't actually think that they're ever going to get caught or held responsible for their actions. So this is in reference to essentially a Bell Canada lobbyist having a off-the-books meeting with the head of CRTC. So the image shows Bell Canada's enterprise CEO Mirko Bibic left drinking beer with Ian Scott, circled, CEO of the Canadian Radio Television Telecommunications Commission. The only CRT record regarding the barroom conference is a staff email to Bell executive to confirm your meeting. The email was timestamped at 5:57 p.m. on December 19th. The photograph is timestamped at 5:25 p.m. Mr. Bibic appears to notice he is being photographed, tech-savvy wrote in a formal complaint. This appears to have prompted Mr. Scott to ask a member of his office staff to send an email confirming the meeting that was already underway, a requirement under the Lobbying Act. And again, it's just convenient that this meeting happened just weeks before Bell Canada put forward a motion that essentially, helped them protect their monopoly here over Canadian telecommunications. Again, link to the Blacklock's reporter article because it's worth reading from cover to cover. Next, I just want to kind of highlight this. This is going to get us into our first clown pill story. Technically, it's not really a full-on clown pill, but it is kind of at least a humorous moment. So watch Russian trader loses it on live TV, drinks to death of stock market. And now, while this is in Russian, just watch the reporter at the very end here because it's literally worth the price of admission.
Со мной в студии сегодня Александр Бутманов, экономист, основатель инвестиционного клуба «Союзники», эксперт по биржевым стратегиям. Александр, здравствуйте.
Приветствую, добрый день, не говорю.
Да, никто уже сейчас не говорит. Биржевые стратегии сегодня это вообще атовизм или вы еще надеетесь в профессии остаться?
В крайнем случае я буду работать Дедом Морозом, как 25 лет назад.
Ну, это раз в год только.
Да. Кроме шуток. Давайте быстренько я это сделаю. Я передаю привет Сергею Усиченко, который пел 12 лет назад, 13, за смерть фондового рынка. Сегодня я пью газировку. Дорогой фондовый рынок, ты был нам близок, был интересен. Покойся с миром, дорогой товарищ.
Я не буду комментировать этот флешмоб, не хочу, потому что я в это верить.
So you can just like, her discomfort is palatable. And she literally says, I'm not going to comment on this stunt because I don't want to believe it. But I think actually she's probably concerned about the consequences of being a reporter in Russia and having someone go essentially against Putin, right? Or there's at least a way you could interpret this, because this stock trader literally says he'll go back to being a mall Santa like he was 25 years ago before he became a trader. And then he says, all jokes aside, I'm going to drink to the death of the stock market. And he opens up a carbonated beverage on live television. Next from Rebel News, COVID-19 has been and so this kind of brings us into our first white pill story of the day. Again, I've been struggling to find white pills, so wherever I see a little bit of hope and brightness, I'm going to start sharing them with you guys. From Rebel News, COVID-19 has been a mild disease for children, says UConn's acting CMOH. Dr. Elliott urged UConners to accept the diversity and differences of other people's choices as mandatory masking and proof of vaccinations are set to end in the territory on March 18th. So this is technically a step in the right direction, although, again, it begs the question, why now, and why did it take 2 years for people to actually start speaking the truth in the administration? Next, I want to highlight, this is a really badass video, in my opinion. Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo is leading the charge against the mask insanity. I'm loving every minute of it. Let's make sure it never happens again. 100% agree, and let's just listen to this based Surgeon General.
You know, it's hard to find. It's hard to find these in Florida. You got to look. You got to look hard. But you know, if you know where to look, you can find them. So I brought this, right. So unfortunately, we have a country right now where most people, including, I mean, this is across the political spectrum, think that these things are saving lives. So in medicine, in science, we have something called levels of evidence, okay? And we've got our high level evidence and lower levels of evidence. And our highest level of evidence are clinical trials. So to the doctors who tell you that these things save lives, ask them, you know, what did the two randomized clinical trials that we've done during the pandemic, what did they show? Ask them that when they tell you that these things save lives. One found nothing, zero benefit. The other found a small benefit, like a tiny benefit that's, you know, that's a little bit methodologically shaky. And by the way, none of them found a benefit in young people. Not a single one found a benefit in young people. That's the highest quality evidence. That's what it showed. Lower evidence is what the CDC likes to tout. You know, shaky studies, shaky methods, finding 80% reductions in infection. Give me a break, you know? I mean, come on. You know, nothing that we're seeing in this country justifies that kind of conclusion. So that's what the evidence shows. And doctors who said that these things are not going to save your life. You know, these things aren't going to end the pandemic. These doctors, they've been kicked off of social media. Like, these are facts. They've had their licenses suspended, you know, because they didn't think that their clinical practices needed to do that. I mean, that's crazy. Good doctors who were brave enough to say what the science showed got punished. And that's happening, and it's still happening, where people are still holding up the illusion that these things save lives.
And so completely agree with him. Again, if you guys want your safety diaper as a safety blanket, feel free to continue to wear a mask till the end of your days. But to enforce this on all of society, to enforce this on children in school, again, I know I beat this drum almost. It's a dead horse at this point in time, but it's worth repeating. We are sacrificing a generation of children in the hopes that it provides some aspect of safety to older generations. Every one of us, myself included, should be ashamed of ourselves for letting it get this far. If you guys want to go down a rabbit hole, from Swiss Policy Research, this is a ton of information about different studies and different real life, essentially cases of when people or when countries implemented and governments implemented mask mandates and what actually then happened. And we can see that there essentially appears to be no rhyme or reason to, you know, identifying any impact from mask mandates. So either it means everyone's using masks wrong, which again defeats the purpose of masks, or it means that they actually don't really do jack shit. And again, link to this in the video description down below. It's a really thorough thing, so take your time going through it. Next from the province, we need emergency access. 82 Canadian professionals requesting psilocybin for therapy training. Psychedelic-assisted therapy involves ingesting conscious-altering substances in a clinical setting as part of more traditional psychotherapy. Again, I personally think, I know I've personally received benefits from psilocybin. I know lots of other individuals that have as well. I don't think that it's a silver bullet that will solve all problems, but to demonize this or to have this be outlawed is completely silly, in my opinion, time. And I look forward to it being legalized here in Canada in the future, hopefully. Next, from the Mises Institute, Trudeau's emergency measures will accelerate decentralized finances importance. And I really hope that this is the case. And I think oftentimes it takes us, sadly, we've all heard the saying, you know, like burned once, twice shy. But I think actually it takes most of us being burned a couple times before we truly start to change our pattern of behavior. So I suspect for a lot of Canadians, after seeing what happened with bank accounts being frozen, they're going to be like, I should maybe look into that Bitcoin thing. But sadly, I do believe it's probably going to take at least one or two more hard burns by our government screwing over everyday citizens, or by seeing the bank screw over everyday citizens, before people will really start to decouple from the fiat currency system. But I encourage you guys, don't be those people. Be burned once, twice shy. Start learning and educating yourself about it now. Doesn't mean you have to throw your life savings into it, but start learning about it, right? Start playing around. Set up a Play wallet, right? And just like transfer over $10 into it just to get used to it. Because it's very scary the first time you're transferring large sums of money on the Bitcoin network. I don't care who you are, how much research you've done. Again, it's always nerve-wracking the first couple of times. Next, as well, from the Mises Institute, environmentalism without government. And we don't have time for me just to read this entire article to you, but please do go read it, because I find oftentimes people think that there's a handful of things that government has to supply us with, right? So it's things like, well, what will we do about roads? What will we do about the environment or people polluting? Again, that's the only reason that you've got those questions and no creativity to solving those solutions, is because so many of us have been indoctrinated that government is the solution to all of our problems. The more you look into government, the more you realize it seems like they cause as many or create more problems than they ever actually solve. And it turns out it's almost always in their best interest to not actually fully solve a problem, because if they fully solved all the problems, then we'd be like, well, what do we need you for? And so therein lies the conflict of interest. You know, if I'm trying to protect the environment and I'm in government or I'm in the administration, I want to increase my budget, right? I want to increase my department. I want to increase my headcount. I want to get a raise. And so that really disincentivizes individuals to actually like solve problems or look at them in a very intellectually honest manner. So again, really encourage you guys to spend some time and check out that article. But let's jump over to the meme of the day. Now, technically, this isn't a meme, and it's not really funny, but I felt like I had enough white pills today that this is okay. You didn't even stand up for the freedom of your own children, so you can shut the fuck up about Ukraine. And that's my energy right now about Ukraine. I mean that what's going on there isn't a tragedy. It doesn't mean that Putin should be looked down upon, right, and have sanctions thrown against him and his cabinet and the elites in his country. But at the same time, I don't want to see every single Russian citizen becoming demonized, right? The same way that I've seen the unvaccinated here in Canada become demonized by our government. I don't want to be gaslit into thinking that this is some Disney fairy tale where Putin is the definition of evil and Ukraine is the definition of good. Because again, that's beyond naive, beyond childish. This is the real world. We're fucking adults here, and we all need to start acting like it. So I'm going to see if I can pull up your guys' chats. But again, seems like my screens are kind of messed up, so we'll see whether this works. Oh, did that work? No, that did not work. Okay. Well, I'm still going to read off some of the chats and appreciate you guys engaging with me here. As always, if you're enjoying this, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Again, we got our first strike yesterday, so our days here probably aren't that long on YouTube. So if you guys want to make sure you never miss an episode, go subscribe to Rumble as well as on BitChute. Links in the video description down below. But before they like completely nuke my YouTube channel here, I would like to get to 1,000 subs. So if you guys could do your part and sub, it would be much appreciated. We've got Peter in the chat. We've got Benjamin. Hey, have to watch later, and only Facebook sends notifications. Well, at least they're sending notifications. Appreciate Benjamin. Aislinn says, LOL, Peter got the screen share high on mushrooms. Al says, sup, y'all. Palaki, you'll have to tell me how to pronounce it sometime because I'm just terrible at pronouncing words in general. We must rename our national dish, poutine. Yeah, there was literally a couple Quebec restaurants, I believe, that took the word poutine off their menus. That'll show Putin. If anything, if I was Putin, I'd be like, I don't want to be associated with a dish that's literally just potato and like beef water, right? Like, why do I want to have that be associated with my name? That seems like a net win for him. April Simmons, the everyday Russian citizen does not make military decisions on annexing a country, etc. The government does. Yeah. And again, there's this weird dichotomy where we're told Putin is a ruthless dictator, but yet every single citizen's responsible for what their ruthless dictator does. Feels like that doesn't jive, actually, those narratives together. Terry says, I'm not with Russia or Ukraine, not enough information, but Russia should know their allies better. China is also putting sanctions because they asked Russia to wait until after the Olympics. Yep, that does appear to be true. What's going on here? Holla, Matt. Appreciate it, Sam. Freeland says, Jean. China does like to have all eyes on them, says Terry. Same government tactics these days, vilify bankruptcy. Absolutely. JJ says they are the new Tartars. Seems fitting since Russia was one of the countries that deleted them. Yeah, I don't actually know a ton about the Tartars, so I should do some research there, study some history. Suppression of info, etc. Jean says, Daniel Cohen-Bennett, leader of the Greens European Free Alliance of the European Parliament, occupation on Wiki, politician, publicist, pedophile, author, no joke, just check. All right, well, I appreciate it, and we'll go check. And hopefully, literally, the reason I got the community strike yesterday is because we had the word child pornography in the video description. So, again, this channel is not long for the world because I plan on calling out child pornography and pedophiles whenever the opportunity presents itself. Sam says, yes, and how many Canadians live outside of Canada that may have donated to the fundraising? It's a good point, right? Diana says, part of the NDP South Okanagan West Kootenay MP's response to my email begging him to vote against invoking the Emergencies Act. Does he actually believe this? Secondly, the leadership of the convoy stated that their main goal was to remove the government of Canada, a government that was democratically elected only a few months ago in an election where vaccine mandates were one of the main issues. They really weren't, though, one of the main issues, right? Like, we weren't led to believe things were going to escalate to the degree they were. Particularly, we were constantly told once we reached herd immunity that we'd be able to go back to normal. And yet Canada has one of the highest vaccine rates amongst adults, and yet somehow that's not good enough for our government, right? Appreciate you sharing that, though, Diana. And that is a very frustrating response that you got from that politician. Sam says, there are 3 million Canadians living outside of Canada. That works out to what? Almost 10% of Canadians. Donna Jean, mine was $1.55 last week. Today, $1.86 for gas. Wow, that is escalating. That makes me wonder. We must be at like $2 up here. Thankfully, I don't use a lot of gas except for when I'm driving back to southwestern Ontario. JJ says they couldn't stop a national convoy for over 3 weeks, so now they make sure you can't afford to leave your own house, let alone go to Ottawa to protest. Yeah, I'm not going to go down a giant conspiracy rabbit hole here, but I've heard some interesting trains of thought in regard to seeing inflation rampant, seeing gas prices skyrocket with the conflict in Russia, and now also Russian airspace is shut down, right? As well as essentially Ukrainian airspace because of the conflict, which means now it's harder to travel internationally and it'll become more expensive as well. Yeah, I definitely know some people that think there's more to play there than just a series of unfortunate events. The Hungarian experiment, damn it, literally have to drive across Ontario in the next couple of weeks, and gas is hitting record highs. That is true, and that is frustrating. Wanda says, smart people. Terry says, of course, Freeland would glorify her homeland. Yeah, and again, understand that she's literally written an essay back in, I think it was 2015, that said, my country, my people, right? And again, I'd much rather our deputy prime minister really be focused on Canadians. I mean, it would have been really cool had she went out there and actually been willing to talk to the Canadians protesting in Ottawa rather than joining in on Justin Trudeau's demonization of our fellow citizens. Jean says, don't want to disappoint you, but Charest is a burn in the province of Quebec. Candice Bergen is my pick. She got more balls than the majority of men, and she's very cute. All right, well, appreciate you sharing your perspective. Again, like I said, the only reason I'd want to see Charest come in is just if we're going to burn down the Conservative Party, which I'm okay with. Al says, I too find solace with you, Matt, the group here and the Discord. Appreciate that. Yeah, and if you guys haven't checked out the Discord, I really encourage you to do so. Community of like-minded individuals. I understand that a lot of these newscasts here is a lot of me bitching, complaining, and red pilling and black pilling people. But in the Discord, there's a lot of people that are focused on getting control of their lives, sharing resources, people doing homesteading and things of that nature. So really do encourage you guys to check it out if that's your ballywick. April says, is it a bait and switch on the part of the mainstream media and the government? I'm not sure exactly what that's in reference to, but yeah, I would say they're more than comfortable bait and switch us on just about everything. Freeland, not very bright, says Diana. Not Freeland, probably owns prime real estate in Ukraine and just doesn't want Putin to take it from her. Again, I definitely don't know anything about that. I don't really actually know if she's got much foreign or financial ties to Ukraine. I do know she's got lots of ties to the World Economic Forum, though. Kevin says, wow. Terry says, we feel at home here, too. Appreciate it, Terry. And the budget will balance itself. That's always something that my inner accountant is just going to be driven crazy by and never forget. Does anybody know what environmental racist or environmental justice is? I would definitely encourage you to do your own research there, Donna, but in short order, essentially the idea is that the impacts of climate change impact the poorest social economic individuals in a country, as well as impact minorities. Because apparently not only is climate change bad, but it's also racist. Because it turns out anything bad equals racism unless it's neo-Nazis in Ukraine fighting another bad guy. So I guess the one takeaway there is that Nazis can be good if they're fighting bad guys, but that's the only time. Otherwise, Nazis are also bad. And this is just kind of me fucking around because we live in the clown world timeline. Sam says, in case you guys haven't watched this one for later, shares a YouTube video so you guys can check it out. JJ, looks like the Green Party just got their quid pro quo for the support of the Emergency Act. Yeah, and to be clear there, Elizabeth May supported it, but the other Green member actually didn't support it. But yes, it does seem like Elizabeth May maybe got her quid pro quo. All right, I'm just going to hit a few more here, but really appreciate you guys hanging out and chatting with me. And I know the last couple, we've actually been able to get this, close to an hour rather than me going on for like an hour 20. So appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that while the world's going crazy, it's not going quite as crazy. When we were in the midst of the trucker freedom convoy, it seemed like there was so much misinformation every day that I was just pulling out all my hair. Tara says, you're 1,000% right, Matt. They are definitely trying to get all of our attention on Russia and Ukraine right now. So that begs the question, what exactly are they trying to divert our attention away from? When people like Trudeau, Biden, and Freeland are all steering the mainstream media to only talk about Ukraine and Russia, our first response should be look in the very opposite direction, because this diversification of attention is 100% intentional. Let's start with Bill S233. Yeah, the universal basic income. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And the fact that our politicians want to pretend that there is, I think, shows the level of economic understanding they have, right? Like, people respond to incentives. And to think that we should be able to just give everyone free money indefinitely without them really having to go and work for it. Again, that's essentially what this bill is based upon what I've read about. It's just so naive, right? Like, we've seen almost in every other situation where government intervention doesn't work, right? One thing that I hit upon frequently when I had my real estate YouTube channel was rent control. And the fact that, like, every study, every economist agrees that rent control doesn't work and isn't effective. And yet every government still pushes it and tries to run on that platform. It's bizarre inverse thinking, in my opinion. And universal basic income, well, again, it's just going to create an entire generation of individuals that will be dependent upon the government. And when people, like, I think it's far too easy to forget how quickly we can lose our agency. And once people become coddled, once they become soft, and that's absolutely what's going to happen with universal basic income. You know, one of the funny tweets I saw the other day was someone was talking about, you know, once communism and universal basic income takes over, I can't wait to teach people how to do something on my farm. And, you know, a troll responded was like, your farm? And there really in lies the issue, right? Universal basic income might even sound like it's got amazing, great intentions initially, but then what happens if you go against the government? And what if that creates such a level of inflation or spending that you essentially can't, the average person can't get ahead without the supplement of universal basic income? Well, then you always have to agree with the government, right? And that's why when we hear organizations like the World Economic Forum say, you know, by the year 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. What they really mean is you'll own nothing and they will be happy because they'll have complete, absolute control over you. Terry says, smoke signals seem more rational at this point. Literally agree. I've always been skeptical of the benefits of technology, cars, fridges, TVs, etc. Yeah, and again, I don't want to, like, I have no interest in being a Luddite. I don't want to demonize technology, but we need to really make sure that it's a net benefit to us. And honestly, digital IDs are far more a net benefit to the government than they are to the individual citizen, right? It's all about control. It's all about complete surveillance of you and every single citizen. Because again, it'll be on this device, and then there'll be an excuse for why they need to track where your digital ID is. And honestly, we all know too at some point in time that shit'll get hacked and leaked as well, right? Because the government's not that great with technology. Graham says, they said the truckers were Nazis and threw the book at them. They are saying Putin is a warlord. Will they throw the book at Russia? Would Putin retaliate? He has more resources than the truckers. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things about not only demonizing Putin, but also demonizing all of Russia, right? You're backing Russia into a corner where you're essentially saying nothing short of complete regime change will be acceptable. Well, how good does that go over whenever we've tried it in other countries, right? You know, how well did that play out in Iraq? Well, Iraq's a bigger quagmire than when we initially got involved in it. North Korea is just as isolated and punishing their citizens more and more, right? This idea that we can use the exact same playbook in this situation and get different results just boggles my mind. But anyways, appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Love the fact that so many of you were jumping in the chat and sharing your opinions. I see a couple mushroom emojis as well. So glad to see that I'm not alone in my enjoyment of psilocybin. And yeah, otherwise, just appreciate you guys spending some time with me. We'll see you on the next video. Again, smash that like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. And we'll play our outro song. Again, if I disappear off of here, go look for me on Rumble, because the moment I get banned on YouTube, I'll pay the premium to start going live on Rumble. And it would be nice if you guys subbed both here and on Rumble. Much appreciated. And we'll see you guys tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Wet fire, math, evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you want.